Welcome to the Lindamood-Bell for Schools Leaders in Literacy webinar series. My name is Dave Kiyvyra, and I am the Director of Development for Lindamood-Bell for Schools. And I'm joined today by two wonderful folks from our partnership in Kentwood Public Schools in Kentwood, Michigan. So I'm going to turn it over, and rather than me introduce them, I'll have them introduce themselves. Sheri McCarthy, would you like to go first?
Sure. I am Sheri McCarthy. I have worked in Kentwood for lots and lots of years, actually. I have background in special education and spent a lot of those years in special ed rooms of some sort, one sort or another. And then in my most recent years in Kentwood, have taken over as academic coach to work with specifically Lindamood-Bell instructors and groups.
Great. And then we're also joined by Holly Lewakowski. Holly.
Hi, and I'm Holly Lewakowski, and this is my 17th year in Kentwood, and I started out in the special ed world as well, first at middle school and then elementary, and that's where I learned about Lindamood-Bell and then grew a passion for it, and tagged along with Sheri for the last 5 years, and she taught me the job, the academic support coach world, and now that is what I do. So great. Thanks, Holly. Mm-hmm. And as you all were talking about sort of Kentwood as a whole, I know we'll talk a little bit more about demographics in just a minute, because I want to talk about the scope of the implementation of Lindamood-Bell within the district and how that relates to, in particular, how you all are seeking to recover from learning loss. I know is how some people are talking about it. We're thinking about it as accelerating students' reading gains. So we're going to talk a little bit about the demographics and talk about what implementation has looked like historically in Kentwood. And then we'll also talk about what sensory cognitive instruction is and why it's important in terms of helping students close gaps between where they're performing and where we want them to. We'll dive into a little bit of data to actually take a look at what some of the challenges following the COVID closures are for Kentwood, as well as for some other districts. And then I think really the most exciting part will be talking a little bit about what Kentwood is looking to do or seeking to do in terms of really accelerating students' recovery. So that's where we're going to head to today. And just to give folks a real grounding in Kentwood as the school district. Great. And just so that we have a little bit of background on Kentwood Public Schools, I know it is about 10 elementary schools, Sheri?
Yep, that's right. 10 elementaries, an early childhood center, 3 middle schools, very large high school that split freshman campus and 10-12, and then an alternative high school.
Got it. There's a ton of different languages spoken, about 60% free and reduced. So quite a diverse district. That's great.
Absolutely. Yeah. We have kind of a little micro world in our Kentwood public school system.
Yeah, you really do. It looks like it. And there's a slide for it. It's perfect.
Yeah.
It's great. So, one of the things that has been fascinating about working with Kentwood is the longevity of the implementation there. So I think it's been going on for 14 or 15 years now, Sheri?
Yeah, I think we figured out the other day that we started learning about it in like 2004 or 5, and really, really dug in 2007.
Got it. And sort of the uniqueness, I guess, of the programs is that they're focused on developing the underlying sensory cognitive functions that allow students to be able to access content material. Right? And so we often think about how there's a language processing spectrum that ranges from students who have weakness in decoding at one end to students who have weakness in language comprehension at the other. And so the 2 primary programs that Kentwood uses are the Seeing Stars program to address phonological and orthographic processing, and the Visualizing and Verbalizing program to develop students' concept imagery, which underlies vocabulary, contextual reading, and language comprehension and critical thinking, right? So those two programs are really where you all spend the bulk of your time in implementation. And Sheri, I know we're going to talk about this a little bit when we get to taking a look at some of the pilot comparison data that you have. But the idea of using these programs that Kentwood has really pushed forward is to start to use them in tier 1 settings, to say that if we know that these sensory cognitive functions are important for students to learn how to read, then why wait to address those until later? And why not press that into a tier 1 setting at K1-2 to really give those students a boost? And a little bit later, we'll see what the impact of that is as students progress into those latter grades, right? And Sheri, I think, as you came into discovering Lindamood-Bell years ago, you were thinking a little bit about what's different about the program compared to what you've been doing previously, and maybe you could speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, I think the greatest difference is that sensory cognitive base, that the Socratic questioning that goes in at the beginning. So you're teaching your kids to monitor on their own and self-correct. So they don't really need an adult there once they understand the whole process. So then you're turning out independent readers. So if you start early, they hang on to that. They carry that with them. And then when they get into the higher level texts and science and social studies in, say, 4th and 5th grade or middle school for sure, they have the skills. They own those and they bring them with them. And we found that when you start early like that, it just makes a huge difference in student success.
That's great. And so, what this slide is kind of thinking about is how you question down to that sensory input to really develop students' ability to hold and compare through that Socratic questioning. And that's what drives students' ability to self-correct, which ultimately helps guide them toward being independent, right? And this is a little bit more background on sort of how the program got started, first with a couple of schools and then gradually increased, coming from special ed, and as you were talking about, Sheri, pushing into the rest of those buildings. And I don't know, I know a lot of the background, so Sheri, if you want to touch on a little bit of the bullet points here.
Yeah, we started small, let's try it. We didn't have a uniform reading program in the resource rooms, and this quickly became successful with our students. We saw a lot of gain. We had teachers who really were excited about it. And so then all 10 elementaries that became the resource reading program. We're also a very transient district. So we have kids hopping school to school. So that made a huge difference. And we could just look up on Informs and start the kids in the new school right where they left off in their last school. We then started pulling in some kids who came up to our child study team. And then all of a sudden we started saying, oh, hey, look at this, works here. And as you mentioned earlier, why don't we take the kids before they are that much at risk and take them into tier 2 groups. So we started some half-hour groups. And then most recently, in 2017, we just completed a 3-year pilot of using it in the classroom as a classroom 20 to 30 minutes standalone. So our district, I will say, our administration has a vision. They can see where it's going, and I think that along with our incredible teaching staff has truly just breeded the success, which then lends itself to sustainability.
Yeah. And Holly, you're a big part of that sustainability plan, right?
Yes, she's the future.
I've learned a lot of what I do from Sheri. In the last couple of years, I know Valleywood Middle School was one of the first middle schools to kind of jump on board, and Sheri started with them. But I've presented to the secondary principals about what we were doing at Valleywood, and so the interest has kind of expanded. And now next year, Crestwood Middle School, one of our other middle schools, is going to be coming on board with their EL Newcomer Center. And I can only see it growing from there. within Crestwood, because some of the other teachers and staff that I've talked to there have already expressed that interest. So I think if we find success there, which I know we will, I think we'll see more people jumping on board. So that's also exciting to see.
Great, cool. And this is, Sheri was talking a little bit earlier about seeing some of the changes happening for kids, and you can see some pre to post data here on what it looks like at a large implementation for their most at-risk students in Kentwood. And it's about 213 kids. And when we start to push to really do intervention intensively with students, you can start to see the average hours of small group instruction really pick up across a district and have a huge impact in all of those parts of reading, like word attack and word recognition, and really leading to changes in their accuracy and their fluency, and most importantly, of course, their reading comprehension. And so here's a couple of other slides, and we'll jump through these really quickly. This was one particular school, Southwood, that had a really strong implementation going. And so you can see the dramatic impact it had for those kids over just one single school year, and how much they're able to close gaps is really exciting. And that leads to thinking about, Sheri, a kind of a pilot comparison that you all did between some sites that were where you said, let's go ahead and push into that tier 1 setting and see what kind of impact that has compared to some sites that did more of their just using it in tier 3. Is that right?
Right. Yeah. So, we started in 2017, and we chose, our administration chose the 3 buildings in the district that were struggling the most in their reading scores. And those became my pilot buildings. So I would go in and do a half an hour lesson once a week for the teacher in the class, and then talk with the teacher and create a lesson plan for the following, for her to do or him to do for the next week. And so that was a good 20 to 30 minutes for sure of standalone time. In Young Fives, we did part of that, the Seeing Stars piece, and part the visualizing and verbalizing piece. So we're just building all those things in right from the beginning. So this is, and unfortunately, that the biggest disappointment was our COVID out of school time at the end of last year. So we never got our end of year data at the 3rd year of the pilot. This is 2 years in. So the pilot building after 2 years, and then a non-pilot building of like demographics is what we tried to do. We matched up some buildings. I think the biggest thing to look at would be the decrease in their at-risk population. So you've got it in the classroom, and those kids who may not have gotten it typically through other programming picked it up. So they never, ever ended up in that really high at-risk group of students. Okay, and here's a slide with 2 other schools, a pilot and a non-pilot. And I think here the remarkable thing is to look at the pilot building after 2 years, and that's great increase in the on grade level kids. Not only do you have fewer kids at risk, but you have more students overall that are at grade level.
Yeah, great. So that green, that tier 1 going all the way up to 60% compared to 41% at the non-pilot,
right,
is a substantial impact. That's great to see. And so, I know that came to a couple of different takeaways that maybe we can run through kind of quickly, Sheri. Okay.
Yep. So we saw a decrease, of course, in the at-risk students in the pilot building over the years. There was an overall increase, dramatic, in pilot buildings, 49% increase in phonemic awareness. And then phonics, a 26% increase in pilot buildings as opposed to a 1% decrease in the non-pilot buildings. So then you have those spill-off things that you really aren't even working on specifically are, okay, now we've got that visual memory going and I can pick up sight words more quickly. and then therefore my reading is better. So yeah, we had it was really an exciting thing, something that we've been wanting to do, and just we're super grateful. And it was a cool thing to see that our administration supporting and saying, yeah, let's look at this.
That's great. And Sheri, did any of those classroom teachers, did they kind of use what they were seeing in Tier 1 to sort of build some Tier 2 groups within the classroom as well?
They do, yeah. They did. They took away from, in fact, in a couple of those buildings, the teachers then started volunteering, like, hey, I want my lowest Tier 2 kids. And they knew then the skills that those kids weren't picking up. So that's where they would aim their Seeing Stars group for visualizing, verbalizing. So, yeah.
That's great. Yeah. And Holly, you were sort of smiling there.
Yeah. And I just wanted to add too, I've been visiting some of those classrooms that Sheri worked with for the last 3 years. And even if we don't have that data from that third year of the pilot, you can see its results in the classroom. Some of the kids will raise their hand. I know that. I learned that last year in kindergarten. Or, so you can see that transfer, that they're holding on to it and they're keeping it with them as they move along from grade to grade. So
that's great. That's great. Awesome. And so we did talk about, sort of the impact of the shutdowns and what they did. And this is from a different district. This isn't Kentwood, but this is looking at their iStation data for all of their K-2 students. And you can see over time, they'd had real growth in terms of those students performing in the highest tiers compared to those students performing in the lowest tiers, as measured by iStation. And then from mid-year last year to the start of this year, it completely switched. And all of a sudden, they've got a lot more of those at-risk students in red there than they have students that are performing at proficiency levels in blue. And it's taken an entire school year to try to bring that back to level. And Sheri and Holly, I know you all are coming up against a similar sort of thing when you looked at your iReady data, which I believe is what this is, right?
Yeah, this is comparing mid-year last year to mid-year this year. You can see we have 100 fewer students tested this year, so I'm not sure those are remote kids or what that is. I would guess that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, and then you can see our at-risk is up 5%, which is disturbing enough. But when you look at it, you can see that our on grade level, our Tier 1 is down. So that's kind of the scary thing. So Holly and I were talking about, oh my goodness, we're going to have all these kids, some kids who literally haven't been in school for a year and a half that are going to be coming back in August. And what are we going to do? And what do you do with them? Right? That we need to address it. To not address it would be the least probably inclusionary thing we could do. So we sat down and as is our habit when Holly and I get together, we started dreaming very big. We had the Lindamood-Bell Center in the district, and we were going to bus kids, but then reality does set in eventually. We came up with this, and we said, really, basically, those kids need a boost. They're going to need a boost of some sort. So we went to our administration and proposed, hey, what if we would have some classrooms, and it's interesting that you say learning acceleration is how you refer to it, which is much more positive. But that was Mike, our administrator, too. He wants to call them acceleration classrooms, where we would do 3 hours of intensive literacy instruction using Seeing Stars and visualizing and verbalizing with a teacher and 2 parapros pushing in. He's committed to a smaller class size, so 15 to 18 students in the classroom. And then those children would work through those rotations with the teacher. So we were talking earlier about how pushing this out there now, we can be really excited about it, but we have some teachers who are like, oh, well, now one more thing. I don't know if I can think about one more thing right now.
Yeah. Yeah, and I was wondering, and Holly, maybe you can speak to this too, but there's right now where people are feeling sort of exhausted and it's been a long year. And so thinking about what to do next year and how things might look different next year to respond to some of the challenges we're facing can be a lot to ask. And that one of the things that may happen is when reality sets in next school year and we do have this really wide spectrum of students within a single classroom, folks will start to ask some questions about, is there a way for us to really bring those kids that are scoring lower back up to where they need to be in a quicker way than we would have historically? Holly, and I don't know what your thoughts were on that.
Yes, I can see that, especially when they get to the beginning of the school year and they're looking at that classroom full of kids going, what am I going to do? I can definitely see them expressing that concern and then looking for something. So that might be the time and the opportunity for us to present this and then to give it a try, maybe in the middle of the year or maybe even for the following fall. Not that we want it to be that long, but right. Or possibly even next summer, Yeah. So.
Yeah. And I think when we looked at the data earlier, we were looking at the assessments that were measuring all the different parts of reading. We looked at the small group gains over the course of a school year. That was, I think, around 80 hours of instruction in small group settings. That takes an entire school year to get to 80 hours. And so obviously the idea of this boost plan that you guys have is to try to get to something like 80 hours in a much shorter period of time, right? Which means that those kids aren't necessarily in this setting for an entire year, but they're closing those gaps in a matter of months, going back into the classroom, and maybe we're getting another cohort of students. Is that kind of align where you were thinking, Sheri?
Yeah, I think that's entirely possible. But yeah, it's shortening up the time that those kids are struggling to catch up to grade level. And I see it as just a great thing for kids.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, one of the under-recognized things I think is that kids know when they're not learning and when they're not at the level that they want to be at, right? And that generates a lot of frustration. And that frustration then bleeds into other things, right? And all of a sudden, everybody starts addressing behavior problems.
Exactly.
But at the root of the behavior is a feeling on the student's part that they're not being successful in what we're asking them to do in that overall classroom. And that juxtaposition, that constantly seeing these other kids performing really well when I'm not performing really well, builds. And so the more that we can work to try to remediate that early on before students spend a whole school year struggling with that. And to your point, Holly, hopefully not until next summer or next school year, but that we can get in there and begin to address those issues now. Great. Awesome. All right. Well, I think that takes us up through our discussion. So Sheri and Holly, thank you guys so much. I don't know if you had anything you wanted to say right at the end, but thank you both for joining us to talk about our Leaders in Literacy today and for talking about the really amazing ideas that you've come up with to try to impact what's happened for students and what's going to happen for them in the future in Kentwood.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you.